Pixis trembled as the human commander entered her cell, anticipating the fatal blow that never came. Instead, he offered her a tray of food and clean bandages for her wounds. The Malon soldiers captured during a failed raid on the human outpost on Nexus 4 had gone wildly off script. Standard Malon protocol dictated immediate execution for prisoners of war. Yet here she was, days later, still breathing and inexplicably well-treated by her sworn enemies. Commander Mark Hill studied the alien female before him. Pixis was the first Malon ever taken alive by humans in the brutal interstellar war raging for control of resource-rich systems near the galactic core. Her purple skin gleamed under the cell's harsh lighting, and her 4 eyes blinked in wary confusion. Mark saw an opportunity in this unprecedented situation. Intelligence gathered from Pixis could prove invaluable, and the possibility of a prisoner exchange tantalized him. But more than that, a part of him rebelled against the idea of mistreating a helpless captive, regardless of species. "Are you comfortable?" Mark asked, gesturing to the soft bedding he'd provided. "Do you need anything else?" Pixis remained silent, her expression a mix of suspicion and bewilderment. This kindness defied everything she'd been taught about humans. Where was the savagery, the ruthlessness her military superiors had drilled into her? Mark sighed, setting down the tray. "I know you won't believe me, but we're not monsters. I'm not going to hurt you." Day after day, Mark visited Pixis. He brought her meals, ensured her injuries were tending to, and attempted to engage her in conversation. The Malon soldiers' stony silence gradually gave way to cautious responses as she realized no torture or execution was forthcoming. For his part, Mark found himself increasingly intrigued by Pixis and her alien culture. He began to see her not as an enemy combatant, but as an individual, complex, fearful, and far from home. This shift in perspective did not go unnoticed by Mark's superiors. Pressure mounted for him to employ harsher interrogation tactics. The outpost's security and Mark's own career hung in the balance. Yet he stood firm, convinced that trust and humane treatment would yield better results than cruelty. Unknown to the humans, a Malon rescue force raced towards Nexus 4. Their mission, to retrieve any surviving prisoners and raze the human outpost to the ground. The clock was ticking. As tensions rose and time grew short, Mark made a fateful decision. He entered Pixis's cell once more, this time with a proposal that would change both their lives forever. The human commander and the Malon soldier stood at the precipice of a choice that could alter the course of the war, and perhaps bridge the vast gulf between their species. Mark entered Pixis's cell once more, his eyes locking with hers as he set down the day's meal. The tension that had defined their early interactions had faded, replaced by a cautious curiosity. "I brought you something different today," Mark said, gesturing to the tray. "It's a traditional human dish called pasta. I thought you might like to try it." Pixis eyed the unfamiliar food, her 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession. "What is its purpose?" she asked, her voice low and raspy from disuse. Mark couldn't help but smile. "Its purpose is to be enjoyed," he explained. "Food isn't just about sustenance for humans. It's also about pleasure, culture, and sharing experiences." As Pixis tentatively tasted the pasta, Mark began describing Earth's diverse cuisines. His words painted vivid pictures of bustling markets, family gatherings, and the comfort of a home-cooked meal. For the first time, Pixis saw humans as more than just enemies. They were beings with rich traditions and complex social structures. In turn, Pixis shared small details about Malon life. She spoke of the bioluminescent forests on her homeworld, the intricate dances performed during seasonal festivals, and the importance of communal living in their society. Days turned into weeks, and their conversations expanded. Mark brought books, music, and even simple games to share with Pixis. They discussed art, philosophy, and the daily lives of their respective species. With each interaction, the barriers between them eroded further. One afternoon, as Mark was explaining the rules of chess, a piercing alarm shattered the calm of the outpost. Red lights flashed, and the sound of distant explosions reached their ears. "What's happening?" Pixis asked, her body tensing instinctively. Mark's face paled. "We're under attack. I have to go." He rushed from the cell, leaving Pixis alone with her thoughts. The Malon soldier paced her small confinement, her mind racing. Was this a rescue attempt? Had her people come for her at last? The sounds of battle grew closer. Pixis could hear the distinctive whine of Malon energy weapons, mixed with the staccato bursts of human firearms. The floor beneath her feet trembled with the impact of heavy ordnance. Suddenly, the door to her cell slid open. Pixis braced herself, expecting to see Malon soldiers. Instead, Mark stumbled in, his uniform torn and smeared with soot. "Pixis," he gasped, "your people are here. They're tearing the outpost apart." She waited for him to raise his weapon, to end her life before she could be rescued. It was what any sensible military commander would do. Instead, Mark did something that defied all logic and training. He deactivated the force field. "You're free to go," Mark said, holding out a Milan sidearm he must have taken from a fallen enemy. "Take this. You'll need it to get back to your people." Pixis stared at the offered weapon, her legs shaking. This act of trust went against everything she'd been taught about humans. In that moment, she saw Mark not as an enemy, but as an individual, complex, honorable, and worthy of respect. Her hand closed around the familiar grip of the Milan weapon. Muscle memory took over as she checked its charge and settings, but instead of turning it on Mark, she moved to stand beside him. "I will fight with you," Pixis declared, her voice firm with willpower. Mark's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you sure? This is your chance to escape." Pixis nodded. "You have shown me kindness and trust. I cannot betray that." Together, they ventured into the chaos of the battle-torn outpost. Pixis's knowledge of Malon tactics proved invaluable as they navigated the corridors, avoiding enemy patrols and setting up ambushes. In one fierce firefight, Pixis saw a Malon soldier taking aim at Mark's exposed back. Without hesitation, she fired, her shot striking true and saving the human's life. The act solidified their unlikely alliance. As they fought side by side, Pixis found herself marveling at Mark's skill and bravery. He moved with a fluid grace she hadn't expected, his actions speaking of extensive combat experience. In turn, Mark was impressed by Pixis's adaptability and quick thinking. Their combined efforts turned the tide of several skirmishes, pushing back the Milan advance. But the battle was just the beginning. As they rounded a corner, a stray shot caught Mark in the leg. He stumbled, crying out in pain. Pixis didn't hesitate. She grabbed Mark and dragged him into a nearby storage room, sealing the door behind them. As she tended to his wound, alarms blared throughout the facility. "Emergency protocols activated," an automated voice announced. "Sector lockdown in effect." They were trapped, cut off from both the human defenders and the Malone attackers. Pixis looked at Mark, his face pale from blood loss, and made a decision. She began to hum softly, placing her hands on his injured leg. "What are you doing?" Mark asked, his voice weak. "A Malon healing technique," Pixis explained. "It will not fully heal you, but it should help with the pain and slow the bleeding." As her alien touch worked its magic, Mark felt a warmth spreading through his body. The pain in his leg dulled to a manageable ache. But more than that, he felt a connection to Pixis that transcended their physical differences. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the battle raging outside faded away. They were no longer human, and Malon, captor and prisoner. They were two beings brought together by extraordinary circumstances, finding common ground in the midst of chaos. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching footsteps. Pixis readied her weapon, positioning herself between Mark and the door. As the steps grew closer, they exchanged a look of understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing off the metal walls of the storage room. Mark and Pixis exchanged a tense glance, weapons at the ready. Suddenly, a violent explosion rocked the outpost, causing the lights to flicker and die. In the darkness, they heard the hiss of a door sliding open. "This way," a gruff voice whispered. "Quickly!" Mark hesitated, but Pixis grasped his arm. "We have no choice," she said. They followed the unseen guide into a narrow passage, the door sealing shut behind them. As their eyes adjusted to the dim emergency lighting, they found themselves in a maintenance tunnel facing a human technician. "I'm Corporal Chen," he said. I've been monitoring the battle from the control room. We've got Malin troops converging on your position, but I can get you out through the maintenance shafts. As they moved through the cramped tunnels, Chen explained that the outpost's original builders had constructed an extensive underground network, much of which had been forgotten or sealed off over the years. We're not sure how deep it goes, Chen said, leading them down a steep incline. There are rumors of ancient structures beneath the outpost, but it's all classified. They emerged into a larger chamber, its walls covered in strange, iridescent markings. Mark ran his hand along the surface, feeling an odd vibration. "This isn't human construction," he muttered. Pixis nodded, her four eyes wide with wonder. "Nor is it Malin. This is something else entirely." Chen checked his datapad, frowning. "The battle's not going well up there. We need to find another way out, or a means to turn the tide." Mark turned to Pixis, his expression resolute. "What do you think? Should we press on?" She nodded, her grip tightening on her weapon. "We've come this far together. Let's see where this leads." They delved deeper into the tunnel system, navigating through twisting corridors and vast, echoing chambers. The architecture grew increasingly alien, with smooth, organic curves replacing the angular human construction. In one room, they encountered a shimmering energy barrier blocking their path. Pixis examined the control panel, her fingers dancing over the unfamiliar symbols. "It's a puzzle," she said. "The sequence must be completed to deactivate the field." Mark joined her, and together they worked to decipher the alien logic. As the last symbol clicked into place, the barrier dissolved with a hum. "We make a good team," Mark said, smiling at Pixis. She returned the gesture, her mandibles twitching in what he now recognized as a malign expression of warmth. As they pressed on, they encountered more obstacles: collapsing passageways that required quick thinking to navigate, ancient machinery that needed to be reactivated to open sealed doors, and even a chasm that they crossed by working together to construct a makeshift bridge. Hours passed, and the sounds of battle above grew distant. The air grew thick with an electric charge, setting their nerves on edge. Finally, they emerged into a vast domed chamber, unlike anything they had seen before. In the center stood a pillar of swirling energy, pulsing with a soft blue light. At its base sat an object that defied description, part machine, part crystal, emanating an aura of immense power. Mark approached cautiously, drawn by an inexplicable urge to touch the artifact. Pixis moved alongside him, equally transfixed. "What do you think it is?" Mark asked, his voice hushed with awe. Pixis shook her head. "I've never seen anything like it in all our explorations." As if compelled by an unseen force, they reached out simultaneously, their hands meeting on the smooth surface of the artifact. The world exploded into light. Visions flooded their minds. A lush world teeming with life. A civilization of beings neither human nor Malon, but something gloriously different. They saw great cities rising, technology beyond imagination, and a society built on principles of harmony and understanding. They witnessed the development of the very artifact they touched, a device created to bridge the gaps between different species, to foster empathy and connection across the barriers of biology and culture. As the vision faded, Mark and Pixis found themselves back in the chamber, gasping for breath. They stared at each other, minds reeling from the shared experience. "Did you see?" Mark began. Pixis nodded, her eyes wide. "The history of this world, the purpose of this device. Mark, do you realize what this means?" Before he could respond, a harsh voice cut through the air. "Step away from the artifact, traitor!" They whirled to see a group of Malin soldiers emerging from a side passage, weapons trained on them. At their head stood a tall, battle-scarred Malin with the insignia of a high-ranking officer. "Commander Zax," Pixis breathed, her body tensing. Zax's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. "Working with the enemy, Pixis? I expected better from you." Mark stepped forward, placing himself between Pixis and the Malon soldiers. "You don't understand. This artifact, it's not a weapon. It's a key to peace between our species." Zax sneered. "Peace? There can be no peace with your kind, human." Pixis moved to stand beside Mark, her voice steady as she addressed her former commander. "Zax, please, what we've discovered here could end this war. If you'd only listen—" "Enough!" Zax roared, raising his weapon. "You've betrayed your people, Pixis. And for what? Some human tricks and false promises?" The tension in the chamber reached a breaking point. Mark's hand inched towards his sidearm, while Pixis's fingers tightened on her own weapon. The Malon soldiers shifted nervously, caught between their loyalty to Zax and the uncertainty of the situation. In that moment of hesitation, Mark made a desperate gamble. He lunged for the artifact, his fingers closing around its smooth surface. A pulse of energy surged through his body, and the chamber was bathed in a soft blue glow. The effect was immediate. The aggression drained from Zax's face, replaced by a look of confusion and then wonder. The other Malon soldiers lowered their weapons, blinking as if awakening from a dream. What is this feeling?" Zax murmured, his hardened exterior cracking. Pixis stepped forward, her voice gentle. "It's understanding, Zax, the ability to see beyond our differences, to recognize the value in other beings." As the artifact's influence spread, Mark and Pixis shared a look of hope. They had taken the first step towards peace, but the real challenge lay ahead, convincing both sides to lay down their arms and embrace a new future. With the artifact humming with power and a small group of humans and Malons now united in purpose, they prepared to face the battle still raging above. The journey to end the conflict had only just begun, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope that it might actually be possible. Possible. The soft blue glow of the artifact pulsed as Mark and Pixis led the way out of the underground tunnels, Commander Zax and the mixed group of human and Malon soldiers following close behind. As they emerged into the open air, the cacophony of battle assaulted their senses. Explosions rocked the ground, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of weapons fire. Human and Malon forces clashed fiercely across the scarred landscape of Nexus IV, neither side showing any sign of relenting. Mark's grip on the artifact tightened. "We need to stop this," he said, his voice barely audible over the din of combat. Pixis nodded, her four eyes scanning the battlefield. "The artifact's range is limited. We'll have to get closer to the front lines." They moved forward cautiously, Commander Zax and the other soldiers forming a protective circle around them. As they approached the heart of the conflict, the artifact's glow intensified, spreading outward in gentle waves. The effect was subtle at first. A human soldier lowered his weapon, blinking in confusion. A Malon warrior paused mid-charge, her aggression melting away into uncertainty. Slowly the fighting began to ebb, replaced by a growing chorus of bewildered murmurs. Seizing the moment, Mark sprinted towards a nearby communication terminal, Pixis hot on his heels. His fingers flew over the controls, accessing the outpost broadcast system. "Attention all forces," Mark's voice boomed across the battlefield. "This is Mark Chen, human liaison. We've made a discovery that changes everything. Please, cease fire and listen." As Mark spoke, explaining the artifact and its potential to end the war, Pixis watched the soldiers' reactions. Humans and Malons alike were lowering their weapons, their expressions a mix of skepticism and hope. Commander Zax stepped forward, his commanding presence drawing the attention of nearby Malon troops. "I've seen the truth of his words," he declared. "Contact the fleet. Request an immediate ceasefire." While Zax coordinated with the Malon forces, Mark reached out to the human chain of command. "General Hawthorne, this is Mark Chen. We've made first contact with an advanced alien artifact, requesting immediate stand-down to assess its implications." There was a tense pause before the general's gruff voice came through. "Chen, this better not be some kind of trick. Hold your position. We're coming to you." As the fighting subsided, curious soldiers from both sides began to gravitate towards Mark and Pixis. The artifact's glow seemed to grow brighter with each new arrival, its calming influence spreading through the gathered crowd. "We need to bring the leaders together," Pixis said, her voice low. "While the artifact's effect is strong." Mark nodded, already moving to set up a neutral meeting ground between the two armies. As he worked, he couldn't help but marvel at how naturally he and Pixis functioned as a team. their actions complementing each other without need for discussion. Within the hour, a tense gathering of high-ranking officers from both human and Malon forces had assembled. The artifact sat at the center, its soft radiance touching each face in the circle. Mark stepped forward, Pixis at his side. "What we're about to show you will change the course of this war," he began. "This artifact is the key to understanding between our species." Together they recounted their journey through the tunnels, the visions they had shared, and the artifact's ability to foster empathy across species lines. As they spoke, the tension in the air began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of wonder and possibility. General Hawthorne, a grizzled veteran of countless battles, was the first to break the silence that followed their account. "I've seen a lot in my years, Chen, but this—" He trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. A Malon colonel stepped forward, her scaled skin shimmering in the artifact's light. "If what you say is true, this could change everything. But how can we be sure?" In response, Mark and Pixis approached the artifact, placing their hands on its smooth surface. The glow intensified, and a wave of energy washed over the assembled leaders. Gasps and murmurs filled the air, as humans and Malons alike experienced flashes of insight into each other's perspectives. As the effect faded, the atmosphere in the meeting had transformed. Where there had been suspicion and hostility, now there was cautious curiosity and the first stirrings of understanding. "We propose a temporary truce," Mark said, seizing the moment, "to study the artifact and explore its potential for lasting peace." The leaders exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between former enemies. Finally, General Hawthorne spoke. "Agreed. We'll inform our respective governments and request diplomatic envoys." As the meeting dispersed, Mark and Pixis shared a moment of quiet triumph. But their celebration was short-lived, as Commander Zax approached with a grave expression. "We may have a problem," he said in a low voice. "I've received word that Admiral Krell and his faction are not pleased with these developments. They see the artifact as a threat to Malon supremacy." Pixis's mandibles clicked in concern. "Krell has always been a hardliner. If he decides to move against us—" Mark's mind raced, considering the implications. "We need to be prepared. The artifact must be protected at all costs." As if in response to their concerns, a distant explosion rocked the outpost. Alarms blared, and soldiers scrambled to defensive positions. "Looks like some people aren't ready for peace just yet," Mark said grimly, his hand instinctively reaching for Pixis's. She gripped his hand tightly, her four eyes scanning the horizon. "Then we'll just have to convince them," she said, her voice filled with grit. Together they turned to face the new threat, the artifact glowing steadily between them, a beacon of hope in the gathering storm. The ground trembled beneath their feet as another explosion rocked the outpost. Mark and Pixis exchanged a determined glance, their hands still intertwined. The artifact's glow pulsed in response to the chaos erupting around them. "We need to move," Mark said, his voice tight with urgency. "If Admiral Krell's forces breach the perimeter—" His words were cut short by the urgent beeping of his communicator. General Hawthorne's gruff voice crackled through the speaker. "Chen, we've got incoming. Diplomatic envoys from both sides just entered the system, but they're walking into a war zone. Krell's launched a full-scale assault on the outpost." Pixis's mandibles clicked in alarm. "It's worse than that," she interjected, her four eyes scanning a holographic display. "Our defense systems are malfunctioning. Someone sabotaged them from the inside." Mark's mind raced, connecting the dots. "Human war profiteers," he growled. "They're working with Krell's hardliners." A thunderous boom shook the building, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Alarms blared as the sound of weapons fire grew closer. "We can't let them get the artifact," Pixis said, her scaled hand tightening around the device. Mark nodded, already formulating a plan. "The tunnels. We can use them to evacuate the artifact and buy us some time." They sprung into action, Mark coordinating with the newly formed joint Human-Malon security force, while Pixis prepared the artifact for transport. The ragtag group of former enemies, now united in purpose, moved swiftly through the corridors of the outpost. As they descended into the underground network, the sounds of battle grew muffled but no less intense. The tunnels, dimly lit and cramped, echoed with their hurried footsteps and labored breathing. "Watch your corners," Mark warned as they approached an intersection. "We don't know if—" A burst of plasma fire erupted from a side passage, forcing the group to scatter for cover. Human infiltrators, their faces obscured by tactical masks, emerged from the shadows. "Protect the artifact!" Pixis shouted, returning fire with her Malon energy weapon. The firefight was intense and chaotic in the confined space. Mark led a portion of their team to flank the attackers, while Pixis coordinated the defense of the artifact. The clash of human and Malon weaponry created a disorienting light show in the tunnels. Suddenly, a stray shot struck the artifact. The device emitted a high-pitched whine, its glow intensifying to a blinding radiance. A wave of energy pulsed outward, washing over friend and foe alike. The effect was instantaneous and disorienting. Mark found himself overwhelmed by a flood of alien emotions and memories. The pride of a Malon warrior completing her first hunt, the fear of a human colonist facing an unknown world. Around him, he saw both his team and their attackers similarly affected, weapons lowering as they grappled with the sudden empathic connection. Taking advantage of the confusion, Mark signaled to Pixis. "We need to split up," he said, his voice strained from the lingering effects of the pulse. "I'll lead the security team and draw them away. You focus on repairing the artifact." Pixis nodded, her expression a mix of concern and purpose. "Be careful, Mark. We don't know the full extent of this conspiracy." As Mark led his team deeper into the tunnels, the sounds of pursuit growing distant, Pixis turned her attention to the damaged artifact. Her skilled hands moved over its surface, interfacing with the alien technology in ways that melded her Malon expertise with the human insights she'd gained. Above ground, Commander Zax rallied the loyalist Malon forces. His voice boomed across the battlefield, reaching those who still believed in the possibility of peace. "Brothers and sisters, we stand at a crossroads. Will we let fear and hatred dictate our future, or will we embrace the chance for understanding?" His words reached beyond the planet's surface, transmitted to the Malon fleet above. Several ship captains, inspired by Zax's conviction, broke formation from Admiral Krell's battle group. The space above Nexus 4 erupted into chaos as Malon turned against Malon. Meanwhile, Mark's team found themselves cornered in a large cavern, facing off against a group of human saboteurs led by a stern-faced officer with Colonel's insignia. "Stand down, Chen," the man growled. "You're interfering with operations vital to humanity's interest." Mark's eyes narrowed as he recognized the voice. "Colonel Hawthorne, I should have known you'd be behind this. What happened to the oath you swore? To protect and serve?" Hawthorne's lip curled in disdain. "Don't lecture me about duty, boy. This war has made me rich, and I intend to keep it that way." Mark's mind raced, searching for a way to defuse the situation. He thought of the artifact, of the shared experiences it had shown him. Taking a deep breath, he lowered his weapon. "Listen to me, all of you," he said, addressing the soldiers behind Hawthorne. "I know you think you're doing the right thing, but we've discovered something that changes everything. This war, it's based on misunderstanding. We have a chance to end it, to save countless lives." His words seemed to strike a chord. Several of the soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, their tenacity wavering. Hawthorne, sensing the shift, raised his weapon. "Enough of this nonsense! Open fire!" But his order was met with hesitation. One by one, soldiers on both sides lowered their weapons. Hawthorne, realizing he'd lost control, snarled and fired at Mark. Time seemed to slow as the energy bolt streaked towards him. But before it could connect, one of Hawthorne's own men tackled the colonel, sending the shot wide. In the ensuing scuffle, Mark's team quickly subdued Hawthorne and his remaining loyal supporters. As they secured the prisoners, a tremor ran through the cavern, dust and small rocks raining down from the ceiling. Mark's communicator crackled to life, Pixis's voice filled with a mix of excitement and urgency. "Mark, I've managed to partially repair the artifact. There's more to it than we realized. Get back here quickly." As Mark led his expanded team back through the tunnels, the ground continued to shake. He knew that above them, the battle for Nexus 4's future raged on, with Admiral Krell's forces pressing their attack. The race against time had only just begun, and the fate of two species hung in the balance. Balance. The tremors intensified as Mark and his team raced through the winding tunnels, the sound of distant explosions growing louder with each passing moment. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with Pixis and her group. The Malon's eyes widened at the sight of Mark's expanded team, but there was no time for explanations. "The artifact," Mark panted. "You said you repaired it?" Pixis nodded, her mandibles clicking rapidly. "Partially, but there's more to it, Mark. It's not just a single device. It's part of a larger network." A violent shake sent loose rocks clattering around them. Mark steadied himself against the wall, his mind racing. "A network? You mean there are more artifacts?" "No," Pixis said, her voice tinged with excitement despite the dire circumstances. "The tunnels themselves are the network. The artifact is a key, a control node. If we can activate the entire system—" Her words were cut short as Commander Zax's voice crackled over their communicators. "Mark, Pixis, do you read? We've got a situation topside." Mark pressed his comm unit. "Go ahead, Commander." "Admiral Krell's forces have broken through our orbital defenses. They're launching a full-scale bombardment of the planet's surface. We've got less than an hour before—" Static interrupted the transmission. Mark and Pixis exchanged grim looks. The gravity of the situation took a toll upon them. "We need to split up," Mark said, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll take a team to connect power sources throughout the tunnel system. Pixis, you focus on amplifying the artifact's capabilities." Pixis gripped Mark's arm, her scaled fingers squeezing gently. "Be careful. We don't know what other surprises these tunnels might hold." With a nod, they parted ways, each leading their team deeper into the labyrinthine network. Mark's group moved swiftly, navigating the twisting passages with a sense of urgent purpose. They encountered their first obstacle less than a kilometer in, a massive cave-in blocking their path. "Damn it," Mark muttered, assessing the damage. "We'll have to find another way around." As they backtracked, searching for an alternate route, the sound of weapons fire echoed through the tunnels. Mark signaled his team to take cover, just as a group of rogue human and Malon soldiers rounded the corner, weapons raised. "Take them down, but use non-lethal force if possible," Mark ordered, his voice low and steady. The ensuing firefight was brief, but intense. Mark's team, their movements honed by hours of joint training, outmaneuvered their opponents with practiced ease. Stun grenades and precision shots left the rogues incapacitated but alive. As they secured the area, one of Mark's human soldiers, Private Rodriguez, approached him. "Sir, how did these guys get down here? And why are humans and Malons working together against us?" Mark's expression darkened. "War profiteers, Rodriguez. They stand to lose everything if peace is achieved. Stay alert, there may be more of them." Meanwhile, Pixis and her team had reached a vast chamber deep within the planet's core. Ancient machinery hummed with latent energy, responding to the artifact's presence. Pixis's eyes darted from one console to another, her mind working furiously to decipher the alien technology. "This is incredible," she murmured, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "The artifact isn't just a communication device. It's a key to unlocking the planet's energy grid." One of her Malon technicians, Lix, looked up from a set of readouts. "Commander, I think I've found a way to increase the artifact's power output. If we integrate our energy converters with the human's quantum processors—" "Do it," Pixis ordered without hesitation. "We need every advantage we can get." As Lix and the others worked to implement the modifications, Pixis felt a tremor run through the chamber. At first, she thought it was another bombardment, but then she realized the vibration was coming from the artifact itself. Its glow intensified, pulsing in rhythm with the machinery around them. "It's working," Pixis breathed, her mandibles quivering with excitement. "But the power levels, they're becoming unstable. We need to—" A massive surge of energy erupted from the artifact, sending arcs of lightning dancing across the chamber. Pixis and her team scrambled for cover as consoles overloaded and ancient systems groaned under the strain. "Pixis!" Mark's voice crackled over her comm unit. "What's happening? We felt the tremors from here." The artifact, Pixis shouted over the cacophony of alarms and electrical discharges. We've amplified its power, but it's too much. We can't control it. As if in response to her words, the chamber fell silent. The artifact's glow dimmed to a soft pulse, and the machinery around them powered down to a low hum. For a moment, Pixis dared to hope they had succeeded. Then Commander Zax's voice came through, grim and urgent. All teams, report to the central hub immediately. Admiral Krell has ordered a final strike. We have less than 30 minutes before the planet is destroyed. Pixis's hearts raced as she gathered her team. They sprinted through the tunnels, meeting up with Mark's group at a junction near the central hub. As they ran, Pixis shared her findings about the artifact and the planetary network. Mark listened intently, his mind already formulating a plan. If we can channel the artifact's power through the entire network, he said between breaths, we might be able to create an empathic field large enough to affect everyone in the system. But the energy output is too unstable, Pixis countered. It would take a massive power source to stabilize it, something that could withstand the strain. As they entered the central hub, a cavernous chamber at the heart of the tunnel network, Mark and Pixis locked eyes. In that moment, they both realized the terrible truth of what needed to be done. We're the power source, Mark said softly, his hand finding Pixis's. Pixis squeezed his fingers, her four eyes glistening with emotion. Our bond, human and Malin, it might be enough to stabilize the energy flow. Commander Zax, who had arrived with reinforcements, overheard their exchange. You can't be serious, he protested. The risk is too great. We don't know what that kind of power could do to your bodies. But Mark and Pixis had already made their decision. As their teams rushed to make the final preparations, connecting the artifact to the planetary network, the two of them stood at the center of the hub, their hands intertwined. Mark, Pixis said, her voice barely above a whisper, if this doesn't work. It will, Mark replied, pressing his forehead against hers in a gesture of intimacy that bridged their species' differences. And if it doesn't, well, there are worse ways to go than trying to save two worlds. As the final connections were made and the artifact began to pulse with renewed energy, Mark and Pixis stepped forward. They placed their free hands on the device, feeling the thrum of power beneath their fingers. Now, Pixis shouted to the technicians. The artifact flared to life, and a torrent of energy surged through Mark and Pixis. Their bodies arched in pain, but they held on, channeling the power through their joined hands and out into the network. The chamber filled with blinding light as the empathic field expanded, racing through the tunnels and erupting from the planet's surface. It spread like a shockwave, engulfing the battling forces on the ground and streaking into space towards the orbiting fleets. Mark and Pixis's consciousness expanded with the field, their minds filled with a kaleidoscope of emotions and memories from countless humans and Malans. They saw through the eyes of foot soldiers caught in the heat of battle, felt the anguish of civilians huddled in bomb shelters, experienced the persistence of ship captains preparing for their final assault. And in orbit aboard his flagship, Admiral Krell's finger hovered over the button that would seal Nexus 4's fate. As the empathic wave washed over him, his hand began to tremble. Tremble. The empathic wave crashed over him, flooding his mind with a torrent of emotions and memories. He saw through the eyes of a human child cowering in fear as bombs fell nearby. He felt the anguish of a Malon mother who had lost her offspring to the war. He experienced the hope of countless beings on both sides who yearned for peace. Admiral Krell's hand fell away from the button. He staggered back, overwhelmed by the shared consciousness that now connected him to those he had considered enemies mere moments ago. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out as crew members reeled from the sudden influx of alien thoughts and feelings. On the planet's surface, the blinding light emanating from the central hub gradually faded. Mark and Pixis collapsed to the ground, their bodies smoking from the immense energy they had channeled. Commander Zax rushed to their side, barking orders for immediate medical attention. Get them to the medical facility now, he shouted, his voice hoarse with worry. And someone contact the human forces. We need their medical expertise as well. As emergency responders carefully lifted Mark and Pixis onto stretchers, the ground shook with another tremor. But this time, it wasn't from bombardment. The planet itself seemed to be reacting to the massive energy discharge. Ancient systems deep within its core stirring to life after millennia of dormancy. In orbit, Admiral Krell found his voice. "All units, stand down," he croaked, his words echoing across all communication channels. "Cease fire immediately. I repeat, cease all hostilities." The backdrop of explosions and weapons fire that had filled the air for so long suddenly fell silent. In its place, a stunned quiet settled over the battlefield as soldiers on both sides lowered their weapons, looking at each other with new understanding. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Mark and Pixis were rushed to a hastily assembled joint medical facility, where human and Malon doctors worked side by side to stabilize their conditions. The two lay motionless on adjacent beds, their vital signs weak but steady. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the lead human physician, shook her head in amazement as she studied the readouts from their latest scans. "I've never seen anything like this," she murmured to her Malon counterpart, Dr. Krizok. "Their cellular structure is changing." Krizok clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "Indeed, it's as if their bodies are adapting to each other on a fundamental level. The implications are extraordinary." As Mark and Pixis fought for their lives, the world around them transformed. News of the events on Nexus 4 spread rapidly through both human and Malon territories. Governments scrambled to respond to the sudden shift in public sentiment as millions of beings, still reeling from the lingering effects of the empathic field, demanded an end to the war. On the planet's surface, former enemies worked together to rescue those trapped in collapsed buildings and tend to the wounded. Human soldiers shared rations with Malon civilians, while Malon medics treated injured humans with surprising gentleness. Commander Zax found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. He coordinated relief efforts, fielded communications from both human and Malon high commands, and oversaw the securing of the artifact and the tunnel network. "We need to establish a permanent presence here," he told a gathered group of human and Malon officers. "This site is too important to leave unprotected. I propose a joint outpost staffed by both our species." The idea was met with nods of agreement, a scene that would have been unthinkable just days before. As the immediate crisis passed and the work of rebuilding began, attention turned to the long-term implications of what had occurred. Scientists from both species flocked to Nexus 4, eager to study the artifact and the ancient technology that had lain hidden for so long. In a secure conference room overlooking the central hub, human and Malon diplomats gathered to begin the delicate process of negotiating a lasting peace. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, with each side still cautious but willing to listen in a way they never had before. Ambassador Lyra Chen, representing the human delegation, leaned forward in her chair. "We have a unique opportunity here," she said, her voice firm but conciliatory. "The events of the past few days have shown us that we have more in common than we ever realized. We can't squander this chance." Her Milan counterpart, High Counselor Zax Kree, nodded slowly. "Agreed, but we must also acknowledge that centuries of conflict cannot be erased overnight. There will be those on both sides who resist this change." As if to underscore his point, reports began to trickle in from the outer colonies. Not everyone had been affected equally by the empathic field, and some were already questioning the authenticity of the experience. Hardliners on both sides decried the sudden push for peace as a form of mental manipulation or a trick by the enemy. Back in the medical facility, Mark stirred, his eyelids fluttering. Beside him, Pixis's mandibles twitched, the first sign of movement since their collapse. Dr. Rodriguez and Dr. Krizok rushed to their bedsides, monitoring their vital signs closely. Mark's eyes opened slowly, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. His gaze fell on Pixis in the adjacent bed, and a wave of emotion washed over him. He could still feel her presence in his mind, a connection that went beyond anything he had experienced before. "Pixis," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with concern. As if in response to his call, Pixis's eyes opened as well. She turned her head slightly, meeting Mark's gaze. In that moment, they both knew that everything had changed, not just for them, but for their entire species. Dr. Rodriguez leaned over Mark, her face a mix of professional concern and hardly restrained excitement. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. Mark took a moment to assess his body, noting the strange sensations coursing through him. Different, he finally replied. Everything feels different. Pixis chittered softly in agreement. We are changed, she said, her voice carrying a new harmonics that seemed to bridge the gap between human and Malan speech. But the work is not finished. As the two struggled to sit up, ignoring the protests of their doctors, alarms began to sound throughout the facility. Commander Zax's voice came over the intercom, urgent and tense. All personnel, we have a situation developing. Reports of unrest are coming in from multiple sectors. The peace process is in jeopardy. We need to act fast. Mark and Pixis exchanged a look of willpower. They knew what they had to do. Despite their weakened state, they began to disconnect themselves from the medical equipment, much to the dismay of their caretakers. You can't leave, Dr. Rodriguez protested. Your bodies are still adjusting to the changes. We don't know what might happen if you... We don't have a choice, Mark interrupted, his voice growing stronger with each word. We're the only ones who can use the artifact effectively. We have to try again. As they stood on shaky legs, supporting each other, Pixis added, the future of both our species depends on it. Together they made their way out of the medical bay, leaving behind a trail of bewildered medical staff. They moved with purpose towards the secured facility housing the artifact, their steps growing steadier as they drew closer to their goal. The guards at the entrance, a mix of humans and Malons, hesitated as Mark and Pixis approached. Commander Zax, alerted to their movement, arrived just as they reached the doors. Are you sure about this? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Mark nodded, his hand intertwined with Pixis's. We have to finish what we started, he said. The peace we've achieved is fragile. We need to reinforce it before it's too late. Zax studied them for a moment, then nodded sharply. All right, but I'm coming with you. Whatever happens, we're in this together now. As the door slid open, revealing the pulsing glow of the artifact within, Mark, Pixis, and Zax stepped forward into an uncertain future. The fate of two species hung in the balance, and the next few hours would determine whether their newfound understanding would lead to lasting peace or crumble under the weight of centuries of conflict. Conflict or crumble under the weight of centuries of mistrust. As they approached the artifact, its pulsing glow intensified, almost as if it sensed their presence. Mark and Pixis placed their hands on the device, feeling the familiar surge of energy coursing through their bodies. This time, however, the sensation was different, less painful, more natural. The artifact seemed to recognize them, adapting its output to their changed physiology. Commander Zax stood back, watching in awe as the chamber filled with a soft, iridescent light. The empathic field expanded once again, but instead of the overwhelming flood of emotions they had experienced before, it felt more controlled, more focused. As the wave of energy spread across the planet and into space, Mark and Pixis found themselves able to direct its flow with their thoughts. They concentrated on the areas of unrest, sending pulses of calm and understanding to quell the growing tensions. Hours passed as they worked tirelessly, their minds connected not only to each other, but to the vast network of consciousness spanning two species. When they finally stepped away from the artifact, exhaustion etched on their faces. They knew they had made a difference. The immediate crisis had been averted, but the work was far from finished. In the days and weeks that followed, Mark and Pixis found themselves at the center of intense scrutiny. Scientists from both species clamored to study the changes in their physiology, while politicians and military leaders sought their insights on maintaining the fragile peace. As the media frenzy grew, Mark and Pixis began to feel overwhelmed by the constant attention. One evening, as they sat in their shared quarters reviewing the latest round of interview requests, Pixis turned to Mark with a look of longing in her compound eyes. "Do you ever wonder what else might be hidden in those tunnels?" she asked, her voice tinged with a hint of adventure. Mark nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've been thinking the same thing. There's so much we still don't know about this planet and the civilization that built the artifact." Their decision was made almost instantaneously. The next morning, they approached Commander Zax with their proposal, an expedition to explore the far reaches of the ancient tunnel network beneath Nexus 4. Zax was hesitant at first, concerned about their safety and the potential political implications of their absence. But he could see the persistence in their eyes and understood their need for respite from the constant demands on their time. "Very well," he agreed reluctantly. "But you'll take a small team with you, and you'll check in regularly. We can't afford to lose you two." Equipped with the latest scanning technology and accompanied by a select group of human and Malone scientists, Mark and Pixis set out into the labyrinthine tunnels. The further they ventured from the central hub, the more awe-inspiring the ancient architecture became. On the 5th day of their expedition, their scanners detected an anomaly deep within the planet's core. Following the signal, they found themselves standing before a massive door covered in intricate glowing symbols. "It's the same language as the artifact," Pixis observed, running her hand over the etched surface. As if responding to her touch, the door began to slide open, revealing a chamber bathed in a soft blue light. In the center stood a cylindrical pod, its surface frosted over with centuries of dormancy. Mark approached cautiously, wiping away the condensation to peer inside. His eyes widened in shock. "There's someone in there!" The team worked carefully to assess the stasis pod systems. To their amazement, they found it was still functional, preserving its occupant in perfect suspended animation. After much deliberation and preparation, they initiated the revival sequence. With a hiss of escaping gases, the pod opened. From within, a being unlike any they had ever seen emerged. Humanoid in form, but with iridescent skin and eyes that seemed to contain swirling galaxies, the creature regarded them with a mix of curiosity and gratitude. "I am Zephyr," it said, its voice resonating in their minds rather than their ears. "You have awakened me from a very long sleep." As Zephyr regained its strength, it shared the history of its people, a highly advanced civilization that had spread its technology across the galaxy, hoping to foster the growth of other sentient species. The artifact, Zephyr explained, was more than just a tool for creating empathy. It was a key to unlocking the next stage of evolution for compatible species. "Your union," Zephyr said, gesturing to Mark and Pixis, "is proof that humans and Malons have the potential to ascend, but to fully activate the artifact's capabilities, a more permanent joining is required." Mark and Pixis listened intently as Zephyr described the process. A fusion at the genetic level, creating a new form of life that would embody the best qualities of both species. The implications were staggering, both scientifically and culturally. As they made their way back to the surface, Mark and Pixis grappled with the weight of this new knowledge. They knew that what they were considering would change not only their lives, but the course of history for both their species. Upon their return, the news of Zephyr's awakening and the true nature of the artifact sent shockwaves through the human and Malon communities. Debates raged about the ethical implications of such a transformation and the potential consequences for both species. Through it all, Mark and Pixis found themselves drawn to the idea. Their experiences had already brought them closer than they ever thought possible, and the prospect of a permanent union held a powerful allure. After weeks of discussion, soul-searching, and heated arguments with leaders from both sides, they made their decision. In a private moment, away from the prying eyes of the media and the scientific community, Mark took Pixis's hand in his. "I love you," he said simply. "Human, Malon, or whatever we might become, that won't change." Pixis's mandibles clicked softly in the gesture he had come to recognize as her smile. "Together, then," she replied. "Whatever comes next." As preparations began for the unprecedented procedure, tensions ran high. Some saw it as the ultimate symbol of peace between their species, while others viewed it as an abomination against nature. Security was tight as Mark and Pixis were escorted to the chamber deep beneath the planet's surface where the transformation would take place. Zephyr stood before the artifact, its body glowing with an inner light as it prepared to guide them through the process. A small group of human and Malon witnesses gathered, their faces a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Mark and Pixis stepped forward, hands clasped tightly together. As they approached the artifact, its pulsing glow intensified, enveloping them in a cocoon of energy. Their bodies began to shimmer, seeming to lose solid form as their very atoms were rearranged. The witnesses watched in awe as human and Mallan features blurred and merged, creating something entirely new. The process seemed to last both an eternity and an instant. When the light finally faded, a single being stood where Mark and Pixis had been. The new entity opened its eyes, a swirling mix of human irises and compound Mallan structures. It flexed its hands, marveling at the perfect blend of human dexterity and Mallan strength. When it spoke, its voice carried the harmonics of both species. "We are one," it said, a smile playing across its features. "We are harmony." As news of the successful transformation spread, the impact was immediate and profound. The existence of harmony shattered the last barriers between humans and Mallans, proving beyond doubt that they were far more compatible than anyone had ever imagined. Inspired by this miraculous event, both species embraced a future of collaboration and mutual growth with newfound enthusiasm. The artifact, under Zephyr's guidance, was used to establish a network of empathic communication across both territories, fostering understanding and preventing future conflicts. Harmony, with memories and personality traits from both Mark and Pixis, quickly assumed a role as an ambassador between humans, Mallans, and the newly rediscovered ancient species represented by Zephyr. Together, they began to plan expeditions to explore the galaxy, seeking out other artifacts and civilizations ready to join their growing alliance. As Harmony stood on a balcony overlooking the bustling streets of the newly established joint human-Mallan capital on Nexus 4, it reflected on the incredible journey that had led to this moment. The once contested planet had become a symbol of interstellar cooperation, home to a diverse population working together towards a common goal. Zephyr approached, its ethereal form shimmering in the fading light of the system's twin suns. "The first ships are ready," it said, its mental voice filled with excitement. "We can begin our search for other artifacts soon." Harmony nodded, feeling a surge of anticipation. "Then let's not waste any time," it replied, turning towards the spaceport where a fleet of newly designed hybrid ships waited. The universe is vast, and there's so much left to discover. As they made their way through the city, humans and Mallans alike stopped to watch them pass, their faces filled with hope for the future. The legacy of two individuals who had dared to see beyond their differences lived on in harmony, guiding both species towards a brighter future among the stars. The adventure, it seemed, was only just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.